Imagine waking up in ancient Rome, not inside a marble palace but in a tiny apartment packed with your entire family. Before your eyes even open, you feel something moving across your neck. Then another, then dozens more. Tiny insects crawl through your hair, hide inside your clothes, and bite every inch of exposed skin. For millions of Romans, this was not a nightmare. It was simply another morning. The greatest empire on earth was also one of the itchiest places anyone could ever live. Modern movies love to show Rome as a city of white temples and wealthy senators, but ordinary people lived very differently. Most families crowded into dark apartment buildings called insulae. Entire households shared a single room, sleeping side by side on straw mattresses stuffed with old fabric and animal hair. Those beds became the perfect home for lice. Once they appeared, they spread from one person to another every single night. The problem started with clothing. Most Romans owned only a few simple tunics. Washing them every day was impossible because clean water was expensive and public laundries charged money. Many workers wore the same dirty clothes for weeks. Sweat soaked into the fabric, mixed with dust from the streets and smoke from cooking fires. For lice, these warm folds of cloth were the perfect hiding place, allowing entire colonies to travel wherever their owner went. Children suffered the most. Roman kids spent their days running through crowded streets, wrestling with friends, sharing blankets, and sleeping together in cramped homes. A single child carrying lice could infect an entire neighborhood within days. Mothers often sat outside picking tiny white eggs from their children's hair with their fingernails. Sometimes they spent hours searching, only to find that the insects returned by the next morning. Bathhouses might seem like the solution. Rome was famous for its giant public baths visited by thousands every day, but these places often made the problem worse. Hundreds of people shared the same benches, towels, oil bottles, and even cleaning tools. Warm steam filled the air while crowds pressed shoulder to shoulder. If one visitor carried lice, countless others could leave with unwanted passengers crawling through their hair and clothing. Roman barbers unknowingly helped spread the infestation. Men visited local barbershops to shave their beards and trim their hair, but the metal combs and blades were rarely sterilized. The barber might cut 20 or 30 customers in a single day using the same equipment. Loose hairs covered the floor while insects dropped from one head to another. A simple haircut could become the beginning of weeks of endless scratching. Even soldiers were not safe. The mighty Roman legions marched across Europe wearing heavy wool uniforms under the hot sun. They slept in crowded tents and shared blankets during cold nights. Long campaigns meant little opportunity for proper washing. Ancient writers described troops constantly picking at their skin and searching through their clothing for parasites. A Roman soldier could survive battle against barbarian tribes, yet lose sleep because of creatures smaller than a grain of rice. The wealthy had better chances, but they were far from protected. Rich Romans owned servants whose unpleasant job was to search through their master's hair for lice. Some households kept special fine-toothed combs made from bone or ivory. Paintings and writings suggest that removing parasites became part of daily grooming for upper-class families. Even silk robes and expensive perfumes could not stop the insects from finding a warm place to hide. Many Romans believed lice appeared because of bad air or an imbalance inside the body. Without understanding germs or parasites, they created strange remedies. Some rubbed olive oil into their hair. Others covered their heads with vinegar, ashes, or crushed herbs. A few even believed certain magical charms could drive the insects away. None of these methods truly worked, and the scratching never completely stopped. Perhaps the strangest part is that most Romans simply accepted it. Lice were everywhere in homes, schools, bathhouses, markets, military camps, and even the Senate itself. They crawled beneath expensive togas and under the rough clothes of slaves alike. The Roman Empire conquered kingdoms, built roads across continents, and created wonders that still stand today. Yet millions of its people lived every day with tiny creatures feeding on their blood, scratching until their skin bled, believing this misery was simply part of being human. To understand why lice thrived in ancient Rome, you have to walk its streets. The city was home to more than 1 million people, making it one of the largest cities the world had ever seen. Narrow alleys twisted between towering apartment blocks, barely allowing sunlight to reach the ground. Crowds pushed against one another from sunrise until late at night. In a place where strangers constantly touched shoulders, parasites hardly had to travel at all. Most Romans lived inside insulae, apartment buildings that could rise 5 or 6 stories high. The upper floors were the cheapest and the worst. Families climbed endless wooden stairs carrying food, water, and firewood every day. The rooms were cramped, hot during summer and freezing during winter. Entire families often shared a single bed. When one person became infested with lice, everyone else was almost guaranteed to follow. The beds themselves made the problem even worse. Roman mattresses were usually stuffed with straw, reeds, wool scraps, or old cloth. Over time, sweat and dirt collected deep inside the bedding. Tiny insects found endless places to hide between the fibers. Replacing a mattress was expensive, so many families slept on the same one for years. Every night, as darkness filled the room, the parasites emerged to feed. Clean water existed in Rome, but that did not mean ordinary people could bathe whenever they wanted. Aqueducts brought fresh water into the city, yet many poor families had no private access. Carrying heavy buckets upstairs was exhausting. A quick wash of the face and hands was common, but fully cleaning clothes and bedding required time and money. The lice did not care that Rome had engineering marvels. They cared that most people stayed dirty. Roman laundries, called philoniki, were unpleasant places. Workers cleaned clothing by stomping on it inside large vats filled with water and fermented urine. The ammonia helped remove stains, but it did little to kill parasites hidden deep inside thick wool fabrics. Once the clothes dried, many insects and eggs survived the process. Customers paid for clean-looking tunics, only to put them back on with unwanted passengers still hiding inside. Markets were another perfect breeding ground. Hundreds of merchants crowded together selling bread, vegetables, fish, and cloth. Buyers squeezed through the narrow spaces, brushing against strangers from every corner of the empire. A simple handshake, a shared bench, or trying on a piece of clothing could transfer lice from one person to another. Nobody noticed the exchange. The insects were too small, too quick, and already searching for their next meal. Animals also played a role in the filthy environment of Rome. Dogs wandered the streets searching for scraps. Donkeys hauled heavy carts through crowded roads. Chickens scratched around homes, while rats lived beneath the floors and inside the sewers. Although human lice preferred human hosts, these animals added to the general dirt and chaos of city life. Fleas, mites, and other biting insects mixed with the human parasites, creating a constant battle against itching. Winter offered little relief. Romans wore thick wool cloaks to stay warm, often layering several pieces of clothing together. Those heavy fabrics trapped heat and moisture, creating an ideal environment for lice to survive. People slept wrapped tightly in blankets beside family members, sharing body heat during cold nights. The parasites simply moved from one person to another, feeding while everyone slept, unnoticed until morning scratching began. Ancient writers occasionally complained about the problem. The Roman poet Martial joked about dirty people and their parasites, using them as insults in his satirical verses. Such jokes only worked because everyone understood the reference. Lice were not rare or shocking. They were a familiar part of everyday life. Even educated Romans who discussed philosophy and politics knew exactly what it felt like to scratch at an invisible bite. Perhaps the greatest irony is that Rome considered itself the center of civilization. Its roads connected continents, its armies conquered nations, and its engineers built structures that still survive today. Yet beneath the polished statues and magnificent temples lived a hidden world of tiny creatures. While emperors dreamed of expanding the empire, millions of ordinary Romans fought a battle they could never truly win, against the lice living in their hair, clothes, and beds every single day. For an ordinary Roman, finding lice was not a surprise. It was part of the morning routine. Before leaving for work, many people would run their fingers through their hair, searching for tiny insects hiding near the scalp. If they found one, they crushed it between their fingernails and simply moved on with the day. There was no panic because almost everyone around them had the exact same problem. In wealthy households, the unpleasant task often belonged to servants. Some servants spent hours carefully combing through their master's hair with fine-toothed combs carved from bone or ivory. They searched for tiny white eggs attached to individual strands of hair. It was slow, repetitive work, but removing the eggs was one of the few methods that actually reduced the infestation. Even the richest citizens depended on human patience rather than medicine. Olive oil was one of the Roman world's most valuable products, and many believed it could solve almost any problem. Some people covered their hair and skin with thick layers of oil, hoping to suffocate the parasites. The treatment may have slowed them down for a short time, but it rarely eliminated the eggs hidden deep near the scalp. Within days, a new generation would hatch, and the scratching would begin all over again. Vinegar was another popular remedy. Roman medical writers suggested washing the hair with strong vinegar mixtures because they believed the sharp smell and acidity could drive pests away. Families poured the sour liquid over their heads and rubbed it into their clothes. The smell lingered for hours, making them even less pleasant to stand beside. Yet despite the discomfort, lice usually survived, clinging stubbornly to their human host. Some cures sound even stranger today. Ancient healers mixed crushed herbs, ashes, sulfur, and animal fat into thick pastes that were spread across the scalp. Others recommended powders made from unusual plants collected in the countryside. People desperately wanted relief from the endless itching, so they trusted almost anything. Without understanding insects or biology, they fought parasites with tradition, superstition, and hope. Magic also played a role. Many Romans believed sickness and infestations could be caused by curses or evil spirits. Small amulets were worn around the neck to protect against invisible dangers. Certain charms were buried beneath beds or hung near doorways to keep harmful forces outside the home. If the lice disappeared naturally, the charm was praised. If they returned, people assumed the magic had simply been too weak. Roman doctors did not fully understand what lice actually were. Some believed they formed naturally from dirt and sweat trapped against the skin. Others thought poor health allowed tiny creatures to grow inside the body itself. Since they had no knowledge of bacteria or parasites, their treatments focused on balancing the body's natural forces rather than destroying the insects. Patients often paid large sums for remedies that had little effect. Children often turned lice removal into a family activity. Mothers sat with daughters while fathers checked the heads of young sons before bedtime. Brothers and sisters picked insects from one another's hair under the light of small oil lamps. The work could last for hours. Sometimes they laughed and talked while doing it because there was little else they could do. The battle against lice became woven into everyday family life. Roman soldiers developed their own methods during military campaigns. Around campfires, men searched through each other's hair and uniforms, removing parasites before sleep. Some shaved their heads completely to make the problem easier to control. A bald scalp offered fewer places for eggs to hide, though it never solved the issue entirely. Even hardened veterans who had survived brutal battles found themselves constantly fighting creatures too small to see from a distance. Despite all their efforts, the Romans never truly won. They built aqueducts, roads, arenas, and mighty fortresses, but they could not defeat one of humanity's oldest companions. Every comb, every potion, every charm, and every expensive treatment offered only temporary relief. By the next week, or sometimes the next morning, the tiny insects would be back. For millions of Romans, the itch was simply another fact of life, as ordinary as eating bread or walking the crowded streets of the empire. Today, when most people imagine ancient Rome, they picture grand temples, victorious generals, and powerful emperors. They imagine marble statues gleaming in the sunlight and crowds cheering inside enormous arenas. Yet that image hides another reality. Behind every triumphal arch stood ordinary people struggling through uncomfortable, exhausting lives. The story of Lice reveals a side of Rome rarely shown in movies, a world where daily survival mattered far more than imperial glory. Archaeologists have discovered lice combs across former Roman territories, from Britain to North Africa. These small objects tell a surprisingly important story. People carried them because they needed them. A comb designed specifically to remove parasites was not a luxury item. It was a necessity. The fact that such combs appear throughout the empire suggests that lice were not an isolated problem affecting a few unlucky individuals. They were everywhere. Even Roman beauty standards reflected the struggle. Wealthy women spent hours arranging elaborate hairstyles that demonstrated status and sophistication. Some styles required wigs made from imported human hair. Others involved complicated braids secured with pins and ornaments. Yet beneath these fashionable creations lurked the same threat faced by everyone else. Lice did not care about wealth, beauty, or social rank. They treated a senator's wife and a poor laborer exactly the same. The problem became especially serious during times of crisis. Wars, famine, and overcrowding created ideal conditions for parasites to spread even faster. Refugees arriving from distant regions brought their belongings and often their infestations with them. Military camps packed thousands of soldiers into tight spaces. During difficult periods, personal hygiene became even harder to maintain. As conditions worsened, lice populations exploded alongside other diseases and health problems. For slaves, the situation was often unbearable. Many worked long hours in fields, workshops, kitchens, or mines. They had little control over their living conditions and few opportunities to clean themselves properly. Large groups sometimes slept together in cramped quarters, making infestations almost impossible to avoid. Historical records rarely describe their suffering in detail, but it is easy to imagine the constant discomfort endured by people already living under harsh conditions. Ironically, Rome's success helped create the problem. The empire connected millions of people through trade routes stretching across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Merchants, travelers, soldiers, and sailors moved constantly between cities. Along with goods and ideas came parasites. Every crowded ship, military convoy, and market caravan offered lice new opportunities to spread. The very network that made Rome powerful also helped tiny insects reach every corner of the empire. Modern science has revealed something remarkable. Human lice have accompanied our species for thousands of years. Long before Rome existed, these insects were already adapting to life alongside people. By the time Roman civilization emerged, lice had become experts at surviving in human environments. They evolved with us, followed us, and benefited from every crowded settlement we built. Ancient Rome was not their first home, but it may have been one of their greatest successes. The contrast is almost unbelievable. Roman engineers constructed aqueducts capable of carrying millions of gallons of water. Architects built structures so durable that some still stand after 2,000 years. Military commanders coordinated armies across vast distances. Yet none of these achievements solved the simple problem of parasites living in human hair. The empire could control provinces and defeat enemies, but it could not fully control the tiny creatures crawling on its own people. Looking back, it is easy to laugh at the strange remedies Romans used. Olive oil, vinegar, herbs, charms, and magical amulets seem ineffective compared to modern treatments. But their struggle reminds us of something important. They were doing the best they could with the knowledge available to them. They faced the same frustrations people experience today when confronting problems they do not yet understand. In many ways, they were not so different from us. So the next time you picture ancient Rome, imagine more than emperors and gladiators. Picture crowded apartments, straw mattresses, busy bathhouses, exhausted workers, and families sitting together beneath the glow of oil lamps. Imagine people scratching at bites, searching through each other's hair, and waking up to the same irritation day after day. The Roman Empire changed the course of history, but for millions of ordinary Romans, life was far less glamorous. It was itchy, uncomfortable, and filled with tiny companions they could never truly escape.